Through all the ruptures and storms of the past 19 months, we have been given much to try to understand. I think about how growing up in the Midwest, I would hear stories of small family farmers in Nebraska, who in the wintertime would tie a rope between their back door and the barn door where the milk cow was kept. The reason for this, I was told, was that sometimes the blizzards were so thick with blinding snow that if the farmer tried to find the barn or his way back unaided, he could become disoriented and risk dying in the freezing snow. These stories resonate with me today because in many ways, I feel as though I have gotten lost in the blizzard of problems that beset our country and our world. At such times, no surprise here, I trust, I often turn to poetry to help me find my way. Today, I want to turn especially to three wonderful and wise poets. Lucille Clifton, who lived among us in St. Mary's County for nearly 20 years. William Stafford and Denise Levertov, two other important American poets of the 20th century. And in a way that I believe would be consistent with much of Lucille's thinking, I would define home in a manner similar to how some Ojibwe Indians have defined how to love, which is the idea of leading each other back to the truest version of ourselves, the person we were created to be. To put that in more immediate COVID pandemic terms, let me suggest this. If normal was the world we were living in February of 2020, do we really want to get back to normal? Or might we use our pandemic experiences and understandings to help us seek a new and better normal, something akin to what Charles Eisenstein has called the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. While the uncertainty of these trying times has been devastating for way too many of us, it has also shed a clearer light on things that need our attention. So far, I have been fortunate to have lived through this pandemic safely. And perhaps I have had more time than many to reflect on what might be the larger message and opportunity that COVID has presented us. The pandemic has revealed much. For example, there are far more compassionate and caring people in our country than I had imagined. And not just the wonderful doctors and nurses who have been on the front lines of saving lives and comforting the dying, but also the folks who continue to work in our schools and the stores we frequent for our necessities, as well as the delivery and repair people and others who we suddenly realized are necessary for our everyday lives, including those who wear masks to protect not only themselves, but others. COVID has reminded us that we are all interconnected. And these past months have softened many hearts through our shared human trauma. It has also illuminated many sharp divisions between us and revealed numerous cracks and failures in our systems of governance. I wish I could offer solutions, but perhaps we first need to listen for the important questions the pandemic has invited, if not insisted, that we ask about our communal and personal lives, so that we might better understand what can be improved and what we might want to change. One of my early observations was to notice the various boxes that COVID puts us in. And I started thinking about how, even in non-COVID times, we are often put into boxes of gender, race, income, occupation, and so forth. And as I realized that I have always bristled at being defined by the boxes others put me in, I remembered a story Lucille Clifton told about when she was Poet Laureate of Maryland, the only African American Poet Laureate Maryland has ever had. It was in 1984, and Maryland was about to celebrate the 350th anniversary of its founding. Lucille received a call from the governor's office and asked if she could write a commemorative poem in honor of the occasion. Now, it's important to know that Lucille very much disliked writing occasional poems, but she was, after all, the state poet, and so she said, "Well, I'll try." And then she asked, "Is there a theme or something I could know about?" And the voice on the other end of the phone said, "Oh, I'm glad you asked. The theme is our good old colonial days." And I hope I don't have to explain how that would go over to an African American whose ancestors were enslaved in those good old colonial days. Here's the poem Lucille wrote. Why some people be mad at me sometimes. They ask me to remember, but they want me to remember their memories. And I keep on remembering mine. Lucille, decent as always, did not send that to the governor, but I think it is an instructive example of not allowing others to put us in their boxes, nor to deny us our own history. Our heart's calling is always to stand firm on our own ground, honoring who we are and who we are called to be. I'm reminded of a poem by William Stafford, which also serves to help me honor my true self and think about what I most want and need to do. Stafford's poem, The Way It Is, goes like this. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen. People get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. As I think about my hope for the future, I think about those threads and how they can help me determine what I believe is really important, not just for my life and the lives of my children and grandchildren, but for all of us, for the lives of all humanity. Let me invite you to take a moment to think about the threads in your life, the ones you follow, the ones that help you know what you want for the future. The question I ask is this: how do I honor the calling of my particular thread or threads? How might I lift them up so that they shine clearly through the clutter and the busyness of my days? As I ask myself that question, I think of another Lucille Clifton story, one that points out to me how I can turn my often felt disappointments and even angers at the unfairness and injustices I see into something more positive. A few years after Lucille came to St. Mary's College and was serving as our distinguished professor of humanities, she was in her office with her door open, as it always was, an invitation to students and anyone else who wanted to stop by and talk. When she overheard another faculty member saying to a student in reference to Lucille something to the effect of, "I don't know what she's doing here. I think it's a waste of money." And Lucille, in her magnificent and incomparable way, closed her door and wrote the poem that became her anthem, a poem that now serves to lift up and ennoble thousands of us. Listen to it. Won't you celebrate with me? Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come, celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. For me, this poem is a stunning example of turning to our higher and better selves. It does not deny reality. It sugarcoats nothing, but it transforms the hurt and sorrows of a woman who suffered from being put into the boxes of being poor and Black and woman and overweight and widowed, as well as someone who faced the challenges of cancer and kidney failure. All of that and more transformed into an invitation to herself and to others to rise up, to choose love above hurt and sorrow. It is a poem that invites us to have the courage to open ourselves to the sharp edges of uncertainty on which we all live. It invites us to share those uncertainties so that we can more clearly address them and move closer to being the best possible version of ourselves. All of which leads me again to wonder, what have I experienced? What new questions might I ask about ways I engage in the communal, interdependent world in which we live? Clearly, increasing numbers of us are willing to put energy into helping bend the moral arc of the universe more rapidly toward justice and the beloved community of which Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke. People like me, who have benefited from white privilege, are being called upon to explore more deeply the blessings we have received and to cast off those comforts that have encouraged us not to see or understand the pain and suffering of others whose lives are different than ours. And so I ask myself, how might I open my eyes and heart more intentionally to those things that cause pain and suffering to others? Things I have been too busy, too comfortable, and perhaps too self-absorbed to notice. I have several times in the past year felt called back to a poem by Denise Levertov, Beginners, which goes in part like this. but we have only just begun to love the earth, to imagine the fullness of life. How could we tire of hope? So much is in bud. We have only begun to imagine how it might be to live as siblings. We have only begun to know the power that is in us if we could join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. So much is unfolding that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud. Levertov's poem speaks directly to the voices in my head that keep telling me the problems are too big for any small thing I might do to matter. It reminds me to push back against the idea that what I can do isn't enough. And it speaks of the communal power that exists when each of us does those small things that we find ourselves called upon to do. Together, we can and must repair the frayed rope that leads us back home. Together, we can create that more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. Perhaps this is the cry and invitation of the COVID pandemic. Perhaps this is exactly what Valerie Kaur has suggested when she describes these times as not the darkness of the tomb, but rather the darkness of the womb. Allow me to conclude with another poem by Lucille, Blessing the Boats at St. Mary's. May the tide that is entering even now the lip of our understanding carry you out beyond the face of fear. May you kiss the wind, then turn from it, certain that it will love your back. May you open your eyes to water, water waving forever. And may you, in your innocence, sail through this to that.